Our next story takes us on a hunt for some of the most sought-after blues recordings from the 1920s and 30s. 1917, a Midwestern chair manufacturing company expands into the record business and takes a daring leap into a new market. Records by Black performers for Black audiences. Over the next decade, Paramount Records discovers and records some of the most influential figures in the history of American music, including Blind Lemon Jefferson, Ma Rainey, Son House, and Charlie Patton. But in 1932, Paramount Record goes belly up, a casualty of the Great Depression. For generations, the whereabouts of many of the original blues and jazz recordings from their Grafton, Wisconsin recording studio have tantalized music historians. Nearly 75 years after Paramount's demise, a man from the neighboring town of Port Washington has got his hands on some old master recordings.
They were the first masters I've seen in 30 years of looking for Paramount material. I know that there were records and masters in the plant when it closed down, but it all seemed to just vanish.
I'm Takufu Zuberi. I'm on my way to meet Dennis Klopp. Blues is a passion of mine, and the artists who recorded on the Paramount label are some of the all-time greats.
How you doing?
Hi.
So what do you have here?
I have a couple of records and 2 metal masters, which I know nothing about.
Where did you get these records from?
The metal masters I found at a yard sale in Grafton.
What can you tell me about these masters that might help me in my investigation?
I've never played them. The gentleman at the yard sale didn't know. He just mentioned that his uncle worked at the record plant and brought those home. I'd like to know what kind of music is on those masters. I'd like them to be unreleased, unknown blues masterpieces.
And Dennis has another question, one that has haunted music historians for over 70 years. What became of the remaining inventory when Paramount closed its doors?
There's more metal masters than just 2. There had to be thousands of records. What happened to everything?
Well, I'm gonna take these masters and go see what they have to tell me.
Good luck.
Dennis wants to know what's on his masters, but I'm also curious how a furniture factory in a rural, mostly white community in Wisconsin wound up as a pioneer in the blues record business. The invention of the phonograph in the early 1900s fostered a music industry explosion following World War I. With economic prosperity and the advent of factory mass production, records by popular entertainers could now be listened to at home. A national dance craze sent record sales soaring to 200 million by 1919. The Wisconsin Chair Company in Port Washington saw the potential of the music business, shifting from furniture into production of phonograph players and then pressing records. In 1917, they launched a label of their own, Paramount Records. Their early releases of regional orchestras and military bands fared poorly. But in 1920, competitor OK Records' hit recording of Mamie Smith's Crazy Blues shook up the industry and created a new market for what became known as race music. This market, which was targeted at African Americans, gave blues a new life. A new era was born. A new kind of music simply took off. In 1921, Paramount also had a race hit with Alberta Hunter's Downhearted Blues. By 1929, blues and jazz recordings had become a mainstay of Paramount's business at their new Grafton, Wisconsin recording studio. Paramount artists such as Blind Lemon Jefferson, Son House, and Charlie Patton are today seen as founding fathers of rock and roll, influencing artists from the Beatles to the White Stripes and Bob Dylan. But Paramount struggled to stay afloat during the Depression. Instead, audiences turned to radio for musical entertainment. By 1932, Paramount record sales had dwindled to almost nothing. The Grafton plant was shut down. Paramount Record Company claims they had about 3 million records in stock. Now, most of these went to wholesale agencies, but what happened to the rest of them? Now, there's anecdotal information which suggests the factory burned them for fuel, and that individuals took the records to patch up holes in walls, and that masters were sold as scrap metal. This is the first time I've ever seen record masters before, so I don't know much about them, but I can tell you this: they're made of metal. They feel a little rougher than your regular record. All that I can see that's printed on here is a number, and it looks like that number is in reverse. Maybe that's some identifying characteristic which will allow us to get more information about these masters. I'm bringing Dennis's masters to John Samuels, a recording engineer in New York City who specializes in remastering old audio recordings.
So what can you tell me about these masters?
These are what are called stampers. Now, a stamper is the reverse of a record.
Okay. Why would it be a reverse?
If you wanted to make what we call a positive, you need a negative to make it. When they recorded it at the session, they recorded directly to a wax tablet. Then they would plate the wax tablet, creating what we call a master. They then make a record made out of metal, called it a mother or a mold. From there, they made yet one more metal called a stamper. And again, the reason you do this is so you could press many copies of the records.
So can we listen to what's on the recording?
Yeah, I think we ought to be able to do that. Why don't we try?
Since a master is the mirror image of a record, John's turntable is equipped with a special forked needle, able to decipher raised ridges instead of grooves.
That sounds backwards.
Yeah. Well, remember, I told you the record was backwards. Fortunately, we're pretty lucky because we have computers today that can easily reverse it. It's just a file, after all. Okay, you ready to hear it play?
I am ready to hear it. I've listened to a lot of the blues, and this is definitely not the blues.
This is not a blues record.
Yeah. What about the other one?
All right, let's listen to the other one.
This is definitely not the blues.
No, this one isn't either. I'm afraid neither of the metal parts you brought me have blues on them.
But John helped decipher a clue on the masters.
Well, these are what are called matrix numbers. And matrix numbers are an indicator to the original recording company what the recording was.
He tracked down the Paramount matrix numbers. The banjo song was a Dixie medley.
It's played by a very famous banjo player of the time named Van Epps. And the other one was an English home music song called It's 3 O'Clock in the Morning, and it was sung by a man named Charles Harrison, and both of these recordings were made in the early 1920s.
Paramount had an extensive repertoire of instrumentalists and crooners, and that's what's on Dennis's masters. But what happened to all the master recordings of those legendary blues musicians?